The first thing Elena did that morning was check the lock on the storage unit. Not because she forgot whether she'd locked it. She never forgot. She checked it the way some people check their pulse after a nightmare, just to know it was still there, still real, still hers. The unit was registered under Elena Hart, not Elena Ashford. Hart was the name she was born with, the name her mother still used when she called, the name that existed before Damien, before the house in the Garden District with the wrought iron gate, before the black cars that idled at the curb, before the life that looked, from the outside, like everything a woman could want. The suitcase was inside the unit. So was the envelope. $22,000 in cash. 11 months of careful, invisible saving. If you think you know what kind of woman does something like this, stop. You don't know Elena. Not yet. Subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. Drop a comment below with the city or country you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Hit that like button, because what's coming next will change everything you think you know about love, fear, and the price of silence. The house Elena had rented was on Delacroix Street, a quiet block in mid-city where the oak roots had cracked the sidewalk into 100 pieces, and nobody fixed it because nobody important enough to matter lived there. 2 bedrooms, ceiling fan in the kitchen that wobbled on the third rotation, a yard barely large enough for a lawn chair. She had paid 3 months in advance. The landlord was a retired postal worker named Gerald, who asked no questions and accepted cash without blinking. Elena had driven past the house 4 times before she signed the lease. Each time she told Damien she was going to the pharmacy. Each time she came back with a prescription bag from Walgreens to make it true. She was not a dishonest woman by nature. That was the part that ate at her most. Lily was 9 years old and still believed in the version of her mother that didn't have secrets. Elena intended to keep it that way for as long as she could. Lily had her father's eyes, Damien's eyes, technically, though the biology was more complicated than that word implied. And when Lily looked at Elena across the breakfast table, Elena felt the full weight of everything she was about to do. "You're not eating," Lily said. She had half a waffle balanced on her fork and was studying her mother with the unsettling focus children sometimes develop when adults go too quiet. "I'm eating," Elena said, and picked up her coffee. "You're drinking. That's not the same. When did you get so smart?" "I was always smart," Lily said. "You just started paying attention." Elena laughed before she could stop herself. Lily went back to her waffle, satisfied. Damien had already left by then. He was always gone before 6. He ran his shipping operation from a downtown office that occupied the entire 14th floor of a building on Poydras Street, and he treated his schedule the way he treated everything else in his life, with complete, unhurried control. He never rushed. He never raised his voice. He communicated what he wanted, and it happened, and that was the end of it. Elena had watched that quality in him for 6 years and never fully decided whether it was a strength or a warning. Her mother called at 8:47, which was 12 minutes earlier than usual, which meant something had happened or something was about to. "You sound tired," her mother said. "Good morning to you too, Mama." "I'm serious. You sound like you slept on a board." "I slept fine." Elena. The way her mother said her name had not changed in 37 years. 1 word, 2 syllables, and it still landed like a hand on her shoulder. "I'm okay," Elena said. "You're planning something," her mother said. "I know the voice." Elena was standing at the kitchen sink, watching the backyard through the window. The jasmine her housekeeper had planted along the fence was starting to bloom. Damien had asked for it specifically last spring. He'd said nothing about why he wanted jasmine. He just mentioned it once, and a week later it was there. That was the thing about Damien Ashford. He never explained himself. He acted, and the world rearranged, and you were left trying to understand the man through the residue of what he'd done. "The storage unit is full," Elena said. A pause. "How full?" "Full enough." Her mother exhaled. Not the sharp exhale of alarm, but the slow one, the kind that carried 6 decades of hard-learned recognition. "And you're sure?" "I'm not sure of anything," Elena said. "That's the point. I'm not sure what he'll do when I—" She stopped. "When you leave," her mother finished. The words sat between them like something dropped on a tile floor, loud and final. "He's not like Dad," Elena said quickly. "I want to be clear about that. He's never—" She pressed her fingers against the edge of the sink. "He's never raised a hand to me, not once. Your father didn't raise his hand to me for the first 3 years either." Mama, I'm not saying they're the same man. I'm saying that powerful men have a way of becoming something, eventually. And by the time you see what they're becoming, you've already run out of road. Elena said nothing. Outside, a sparrow landed on the fence post and sat there for a moment, testing its weight, and then flew off. Lily's doing well, Elena said. The subject change was clumsy, and they both knew it. She's a good girl, her mother said. She deserves stability. Stability. That's why I'm being careful. That's why it's taken this long. I know, baby. Her mother's voice dropped, went softer. You know I'm proud of you for being careful. But whatever you're planning, be sure. Because once you start that machine running, you can't unstart it. Elena turned away from the window. I know, she said. What Elena did not know, what she had no way of knowing, was that Damien's car was still in the garage. He had come back. His driver had texted him at 7:40 about a problem on the West Bank Expressway. Overturned flatbed, backed up for 2 miles. Damien had told the driver to wait. He'd gone back inside through the side entrance to collect a file he'd forgotten in his study, moving through his own house with the silent, particular tread of a man who had learned early in life to make no unnecessary noise. I was in the hallway when he heard his wife's voice from the kitchen. He stopped. He was not the kind of man who eavesdropped. He was the kind of man who never needed to, because people generally told him what he needed to know or lived with the consequences of not doing so. But Elena's voice had something in it, a texture he didn't recognize, and he stood there in his own hallway, one hand resting against the wall, and listened. He heard the word leaving. He heard his wife say he was not like her father. He heard her mother say that powerful men have a way of becoming something. He heard the careful, loving architecture of a plan that had apparently been months in the making. A storage unit, money, a house. A house. Damien Ashford stood in his hallway and felt something he had not felt in a very long time. It was not anger. It was something older and less familiar, something that lived below anger in a place most men never had to visit. He was afraid. Not the way he was afraid when a deal turned bad or a rival moved against him. Those were problems. Problems had solutions. Problems were the geography of his daily life, and he navigated them the way a sailor navigates water, by learning the currents and using them. This was not a problem. This was Elena. Elena, who made Lily's lunch every morning and argued with him about the thermostat, and had once, in the first year of their marriage, fallen asleep on the couch, with a library book open on her chest, and looked so entirely herself, so entirely at peace, that Damien had stood in the doorway of the living room for nearly 4 minutes, just watching her breathe. He had told no one about those 4 minutes. He never would. He heard the call end. He heard the soft click of Elena setting her phone on the counter. He left before she could come into the hallway. He went out the side entrance, got in the car, told his driver to find another route. He said nothing else for the entire ride downtown. The office was on the 14th floor, and from the windows on the south side, you could see the river. Damien had never paid much attention to that view. He paid attention to it now. He stood at the glass for a long time, his coffee cooling on the desk behind him, and looked at the brown water moving south toward the Gulf. His assistant, a man named Warren, who had worked for him for 9 years and understood the value of silence, appeared in the doorway and then disappeared again without speaking when he read Damien's posture correctly. Marcus Reeve knocked 40 minutes later. Marcus was Damien's operations director and had been his closest associate for 11 years. He was the person Damien talked to when talking was unavoidable. "You look like something died," Marcus said. "Close the door." Marcus closed it and sat down without being invited. That was the nature of 11 years. It bought you the right to sit without asking. "Elena's leaving," Damien said. Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Did she say that?" "I overheard." "What exactly did you—" "She has a storage unit, cash, a rental property." Damien turned from the window. "She's been planning this for months." Marcus leaned back in the chair. He had a particular kind of stillness when he was processing something. He went almost completely motionless, like a man holding his breath underwater. "Did something happen between you two? Something recent?" "Not that I know of." "Is that a no?" Damien looked at him. "That's me telling you I don't know." "Which is not a phrase I'm comfortable saying." "What do you want to do about it?" "Nothing." Marcus blinked. "Nothing. She doesn't know I heard. She doesn't know I know. I'm not going to confront her. I'm not going to make her feel cornered. Damien said it flatly, the way he said everything. Not cold exactly, but clipped, stripped of excess. I need to understand why. You could just ask her. If I ask her, she'll know I overheard. And then the conversation becomes about that, not about the real thing. Marcus rubbed his jaw. What do you think the real thing is? Damien walked to his desk and sat down. He looked at the file he'd come back to the house to retrieve, which was sitting unopened in front of him. He had not looked at it once. She's afraid of me, he said. The words were flat, factual, like reading from a report. Marcus said nothing. Not afraid that I'll hurt her physically. She said that specifically. Damien's jaw tightened once, briefly, and then released. Afraid that I'll become something, that's how she put it. That powerful men become something. She's talking about her father. I know who she's talking about. And you knew about that history when you married her. I knew about it, Damien said. I thought I'd given her enough evidence to the contrary. He paused. Apparently I was wrong about that. The file still sat unopened. Outside, the river kept moving. Damien had met Elena Hart at a hospital fundraiser 6 years ago. She had been wearing a blue dress and arguing with a parking attendant over a validation stamp with the specific, focused energy of a woman who had never had the luxury of ignoring small injustices. He had watched that argument from across the lobby and thought, that woman does not bluff. He'd been right about that. He'd been right about most things with Elena. The thing he'd apparently been wrong about was believing that the life he'd built around her was enough to make her feel safe. He had bought the jasmine because she'd once mentioned, once in passing, years ago, that her grandmother's yard had always smelled like jasmine in the spring. He had paid the mortgage on her mother's house anonymously through an attorney she'd never be able to trace back to him, because Elena's mother was too proud to accept charity and too tired to keep working the way she worked. He had, when Lily was 3 years old and her heart was failing in a hospital room that smelled like antiseptic and everything. Damien hated about the limitations of money. He had called in every favor he had in 2 states to get her into surgery with the best pediatric cardiac surgeon on the Gulf Coast. He had never told Elena the full cost of that, not because he wanted credit, because the accounting of it felt beside the point. That was the architecture of his love. He built things around her and said nothing about them, and apparently she had looked at all of it and seen a cage instead of a shelter. That thought sat in his chest like something lodged wrong. He picked up the file. He opened it. He read 3 sentences and closed it again. I need you to do something for me, he said to Marcus. What? I need you to pull the security footage from the exterior cameras, the street-facing ones. He looked up. From the last 11 months. Marcus frowned. You're going to track her movements. I'm going to understand what I missed. He said it with absolute certainty, and then immediately, don't look at me like that. I'm not looking at you like anything. You are. You think this is a control thing. Is it? The question sat between them. Damien did not answer it immediately, which was itself an answer of a kind. I need to know who she talked to, he said finally. Not so I can stop her, so I can understand whether this stays between her and me, or whether there are other people involved. He paused. And whether there's someone who helped her, someone who should have come to me. Marcus stood up. I'll pull the footage. One more thing. Yeah. Nobody touches this, not a word to anyone else in the building. This doesn't leave this room. Marcus nodded and left. Damien sat alone in his office for another hour. He did not read the file. He did not return any of the 14 calls that had accumulated on his phone. He sat and thought about a woman in a blue dress arguing over a parking stamp, and a little girl with a repaired heart who looked at him sometimes with complete, uncomplicated trust, and a storage unit somewhere in this city that he had never known existed, full of the quiet evidence of everything he'd failed to make feel like home. At 11:15, his assistant knocked. Your 2 o'clock is requesting a reschedule. Fine. And there's a package at reception. No return address. Damien looked up slowly. What kind of package? Small, padded envelope. The assistant hesitated. It's addressed to Mrs. Ashford at this address. Damien stood up. The envelope was unremarkable. Manila, standard, the kind you could buy at any post office in America. Elena's name was handwritten in blocky capital letters. The office address, not the house. Someone knew Elena existed and knew where her husband worked, and had chosen to communicate through that particular combination. Damien stared at it for a long time without touching it. Then he picked up his phone and called Marcus. "Change of plans," he said. "Pull everything, every camera, every communication log for the last year, and put a car on the Delacroix Street address." A pause. "How do you already know the address?" Damien set the envelope down carefully. "I pay attention," he said. "That's always been the problem." He ended the call. He looked at the envelope. He thought about Elena in the kitchen, her voice low and careful, describing the shape of her exit to her mother. He thought, "She built a door." And then he thought, "I built the room she needs to escape from." The second thought was harder than the first. He did not open the envelope. He locked it in his desk drawer, and he sat down, and he started thinking about what kind of man he was going to have to become, or stop being, if he was going to have any chance of making Elena Hart want to stay. Outside the window, the river ran south, indifferent, carrying everything the city needed to lose. The envelope stayed locked in Damien's desk for 3 days. He didn't open it. Not because he lacked the nerve. Nerve was the one resource Damien Ashford had never run short of, but because opening it would make whatever was inside real, and he was not yet ready for one more real thing to manage. He had enough real things. He had the footage Marcus had pulled, 47 hours of exterior camera recordings spanning 11 months, which Damien had watched in segments late at night in his office, with the lights off and a glass of bourbon he never finished. He had watched Elena leave the house on Tuesday mornings, which was her standing hair appointment, and return 2 hours later. He had watched her leave on certain Thursdays with no explanation and return empty-handed. He had watched her park on Delacroix Street and sit in her car for 6 minutes before going inside, and he had watched her face through the windshield, angled, slightly blurred by the camera's distance. And he could not read it. He was a man who could read most faces, and he could not read his wife's. That was the part that kept him up. Marcus came in on the third morning and set a folder on the desk without speaking. Damien looked at it. "Tell me," he said. "She didn't have help from anyone inside your operation." Marcus sat down. "I checked every contact, every phone record I could pull without tipping anyone off. It was her, her mother, and the landlord on Delacroix." "Gerald Mouton," Damien said. "You already ran him." "Night before last." Damien turned the folder over without opening it. "Retired postal worker. No criminal record. No connections to anyone I know. He rents 4 properties and keeps his nose clean. So she did this herself." "She did this herself." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "That's not nothing, Damien. That took discipline." "I know what it took." Damien's voice didn't change. "It took 11 months of lying to my face every morning, and I didn't notice a single day of it." Marcus didn't respond to that. There was nothing useful to say. "The envelope," Damien said. "What about it?" "Open it." Marcus blinked. "You want me to—" "I've been staring at the thing for 3 days. I'd like someone else's hands on it first." He slid the desk drawer open and set the envelope on the surface between them. "If it's personal correspondence from a friend of Elena's, I want to know. If it's something else, I want to know faster." Marcus picked it up. He turned it over, examined the postmark. Local, New Orleans, mailed 4 days ago, and then carefully unsealed the flap. Inside was a single photograph. Marcus set it on the desk facing Damien. Damien looked at it for a long time without speaking. The photograph showed Elena coming out of the Delacroix Street house. The angle suggested it was taken from across the street, probably from a car. Elena was carrying a tote bag and looking down at her phone. Lily was beside her, half a step behind, wearing her school backpack. Someone had drawn a red circle around Lily's face. No note, no message, just the circle. The temperature in the room did not change. Damien's expression did not change. But something shifted in the air around him, some quality of attention, some density, that made Marcus sit up straighter without intending to. "Somebody's been watching her," Marcus said. "Somebody's been watching both of them." Damien stood up. "And they wanted me to know. This is a threat. This is an opening move." Damien picked up the photograph and looked at it again, closely, the way he looked at contracts and at maps, and at any document that was going to require a response. "Whoever sent this knows Elena has a life I didn't know about. That means they've been watching longer than 3 days." He set it down. "Who knows about Lily? Within your operation?" "Start there." Marcus rubbed the back of his neck. A handful of people. I know. You know. Reyes knows because he drove Elena to the hospital that time she had the allergic reaction. Bryant knows because he was there when the paperwork came through after the surgery. Damien finished the sentence. 6 years ago. Right. Who else? Harlan Voss would know. He handles your personal financials. The surgery payments would have gone through his accounts. Damien was already walking to the window. Pull Voss's communication records, everything from the last 6 months. Damien, Voss has been with you for 8 years. And 11 months ago, somebody started watching my wife. He turned around. I'm not accusing Harlan. I'm accounting for every possible leak. Start there and work outward. He paused. And put another car on the Delacroix address. 2 men this time, rotating shifts. And if Elena notices the car? She won't. She'll be looking for threats, not protection. He stopped. We're not going to tell her. Marcus looked at him steadily. You're going to protect her from a threat she doesn't know exists while she's actively planning to leave you. Yes. That's a complicated position. Most positions worth holding are. Marcus left. Damien stood at the window and looked at the photograph again. Lily's face inside a red circle. His daughter, not biologically, not legally yet, the paperwork was still working through the system, his daughter nonetheless, in every way that mattered to him, which was the only way he measured things. He had been 8 years old when his own father died. The details weren't dramatic. A heart attack, 3 stairs from the bottom of a staircase in a rented house in Metairie, but the aftermath had been. His mother had struggled and then stopped struggling and then disappeared into her own grief in a way that made her presence in the house feel like an absence. Damien had learned very young that the world did not protect people who needed protection unless someone with the will to do it stood in the gap. He had spent 30 years standing in that gap for other people's interests. He had built an empire on the logic of power and leverage and the careful application of pressure at the right points. He was not a violent man by preference. Violence was expensive and imprecise, but he was capable of it, and the people who worked for him and against him both understood that. And now someone had drawn a circle around his daughter's face and mailed it to his office. He put the photograph in the locked drawer and picked up his phone and called Elena. She answered on the second ring. Hey. Hey. He kept his voice level. Ordinary. The tone of a husband checking in, not a man managing a crisis. What are you and Lily doing this afternoon? A small pause. Just a second, maybe less. She's at school until 3. I was going to pick her up and take her to the park. Which park? Another pause, slightly longer. City Park. Why? I might be done early. Thought I'd meet you. Oh. The word was carefully neutral. He could hear her working through it, surprised, then the slightly forced ease of someone recalibrating. Sure, that'd be nice. The park by the sculpture garden, he said. I'll find you. He ended the call and stood still for a moment. He hated what he was doing, which was monitoring her whereabouts under the cover of casual affection. He hated it with a specific, particular self-disgust that he had no time to indulge. He told himself it was necessary, and it was, and that didn't make it anything other than what it was. At 2:45, he was parked on Harrison Avenue watching the park entrance. His driver, an ex-Marine named Tolly, sat in the front without speaking, which was one of Tolly's great professional virtues. Elena arrived at 3:12, Lily beside her, backpack still on. Lily was talking. Damien could see her mouth moving from this distance, the particular animation of a child full of school day news, and Elena was nodding and responding. And for a moment the two of them walking together was the most ordinary, uncomplicated thing Damien had seen in days. He got out of the car. Lily saw him first. Her face opened up the way a window opens, sudden, all the way. Dad! She dropped Elena's hand and ran at him, and Damien caught her and lifted her in one motion, which his lower back registered as a complaint he ignored. You're really here, Lily said, close to his ear. The way she said it, the specific surprise of it, landed somewhere unpleasant. Said I would be, he said. He set her down and looked at Elena over Lily's head. Elena was watching him with an expression that he recognized as careful, the pleasant, composed face she wore when she was thinking something she hadn't decided to say yet. This is a surprise, she said. Good one or bad one? Just a surprise. She smiled, small and real. Come on, she wants to see the ducks. They walked together and Lily ran ahead, and Damien matched Elena's pace without crowding her. He knew the geometry of her comfort, how much space she needed beside her, how she held herself when she was tense, the slight forward tilt of her shoulders when she was relieved. He had cataloged these things over 6 years without ever explaining why. You seem tired, she said. Busy week. Anything I should know about? He looked at her sideways. It was a question she asked sometimes, careful and open-ended, the kind of question that had two meanings depending on his mood. Most of the time he said no and meant it in the simplest way. Today he said, nothing pressing, and hated himself quietly. Lily had reached the pond and was crouching at the edge, negotiating with a duck through a combination of crackers and earnest monologue. Elena stopped a few feet back and watched her, and the expression on her face then, unguarded, entirely soft, was the same expression she'd had when Lily was 3 years old in a hospital room and the surgeon had come out with good news. She's doing well in math, Elena said. I know, she showed me her test. She was really proud. She should be. A pause. A comfortable one, or what would have been comfortable 3 days ago. Now it sat between them differently, heavier, carrying the weight of everything they weren't saying. Damien, Elena said. Yeah. Are you happy? He turned to look at her. It was not a question she asked often. It was not a question either of them traded casually, because happiness was not the currency of their marriage. They were both too practical for that, too aware of how the word got used as a placeholder for things people weren't willing to name specifically. That depends on the day, he said, because it was honest. She nodded slowly. She was looking at Lily, not at him. I've been thinking a lot lately. About? About choices. The ones we make, the ones we don't notice we're making. That's broad. I know. She turned to look at him then. Her eyes were the particular gray-green that shifted in outdoor light, and at this moment they were just green. Do you ever wish things were different? Which things? She didn't answer right away. Lily was now in animated discussion with 2 ducks and appeared to be winning. Elena watched her daughter and said, very quietly, I want Lily to know what it feels like to choose things freely when she grows up. She will. I want her to know what it looks like, to model it, from us. She paused. From me. Damien looked at his wife's profile, the line of her jaw, the way she held her breath slightly after saying something that cost her something. Elena, I'm not trying to start anything, she said quickly. Not here. I know, he exhaled. I know you're not. Lily shouted from the pond that one of the ducks had stolen an entire cracker whole, and this was outrageous, and they needed to come see immediately. They both went, and the moment closed over itself like water, and neither of them acknowledged what had almost broken the surface. On the drive back, Tolly took a route that passed within 2 blocks of Delacroix Street. Damien had not asked him to. Tolly had chosen it, probably out of habit, because Tolly drove efficient routes, and that happened to be one. Damien sat in the back seat and looked out the window and thought about a house he had never been inside, with a ceiling fan that wobbled on the 3rd rotation, and a woman who had stood in the kitchen of his house for 6 years and somehow still felt the need to build a door. Marcus called at 9:17 that night, after Lily was in bed and Elena was reading in the sitting room with the television on low. Damien took the call in his study with the door closed. I found something in Voss's records, Marcus said. He sounded different, flatter. Talk. He's been communicating with someone outside the organization, encrypted messages through a secondary email account, the kind of account you set up when you don't want the primary one traced. A pause. I had to call in a favor to get into it. Who's he talking to? I don't have a name yet. The account is a relay set. It bounces through 2 servers. But the content... Marcus stopped. Marcus. He's been feeding information about your personal life. Elena's movements. Lily's school. The surgery, 6 years back. He gave them the full financial trail on that. Another pause, shorter. And the Delacroix address. He gave them that too. The room was very quiet. How long? Damien said. Based on what I can see? 7 months, minimum. 7 months. 4 months before Elena had found the storage unit. 3 months before the rental. He didn't start this in response to Elena's plan, Damien said. No, Marcus said. He started it first. Damien sat with that for a moment. The arithmetic of betrayal, who moved first, who responded to whom, what the actual sequence had been under the version of events he'd believed. Someone gave Elena a reason to be afraid, he said. Damien, she was already cautious, she was already carrying her history with her father, but a year ago she started building an exit. 7 months ago, Voss started feeding information to someone outside the organization. He kept his voice level. The level was costing him something. Find out who he's talking to. Don't move on Voss yet. Don't let him know we're looking. And the photograph? The one mailed to the office? Whoever sent it knows I know about Elena's life outside this house. They wanted me off balance. He stood up. Or they wanted Elena in play, as leverage against me. That would mean someone's planning a move against the operation. That would mean someone has been planning it for at least 7 months. He walked to the window. Outside, the garden district was quiet. Pull everything on Voss's outside contact. I want to know who this is before I sit across a table from Harlan Voss and decide what to do with him. And Elena? He watched the dark street below. The car Marcus had posted was invisible from this angle, that was the point. But he knew it was there. She's safe, he said. Make sure she stays that way. He ended the call. He stood at the window for a long time. In the sitting room down the hall, the television murmured. He could hear, very faintly, the particular sound of Elena turning a page. The man who had betrayed him had been sitting 2 offices down for 8 years, had attended the dinner when Lily came home from the hospital, had shaken Damien's hand at Christmas, had told him, 3 months ago, that the West Bank operation was running clean and profitable, and Damien had believed him, and the ease of that belief was now something Damien looked at with a cold and surgical disgust. He had made one critical error in building his empire. He had confused loyalty with familiarity. He had assumed that the people who had been with him the longest were the people most invested in his continued success. He had not accounted sufficiently for the other side of that logic, that the people who knew him longest also knew the most things that could be used against him. He went back to his desk. He opened the folder Marcus had delivered that morning, which contained Harlan Voss's financial records for the past 2 years, and began to read. At 11:45, Elena appeared in the doorway. He looked up. She was in her robe, hair down, a glass of water in one hand. She looked at him and at the folder and at the pen in his hand. You're still working. Nearly done. She leaned against the doorframe. Not coming in. Not leaving. You've been in here all night. I know. I'm sorry. She studied him for a moment with that same careful quality, the green-gray eyes reading something she wasn't going to name. You don't have to apologize. I know I don't have to. A small pause. Is something wrong? He looked at his wife. He looked at the woman who had spent 11 months building an exit from his life, who was afraid of what he might become, who had her mother's voice and her daughter's trust, and a rented house with a wobbling ceiling fan she had never once mentioned. He looked at the woman he had loved, in his own inadequate and inarticulate way, for 6 years, and whose face he had watched on security footage and still could not fully read. Nothing I can't manage, he said. She nodded once. She believed him, or she chose to act as if she did, which in a marriage often amounted to the same thing. Don't stay up too late, she said. I won't. She left. He listened to her footsteps go down the hall, heard the soft close of the bedroom door. He turned back to Voss's records. At the bottom of the 3rd page, under a column of routine transactions that a less careful man would have stopped reading before reaching, he found it. A transfer. Small enough not to trigger automatic review, some $8,400, logged as a vendor payment for office supplies. The vendor account traced to a shell company registered in Baton Rouge. The shell company's registration address was a UPS store on Magazine Street. Damien stared at the address. He had seen that address before. He was certain of it. He pressed his memory the way you press a bruise, methodical and willing to accept the pain of it, working backward through the past year's worth of documentation. It took him 11 minutes. The address had appeared once before, 14 months ago, in a contract dispute involving a competing shipping operation on the river. A mid-size outfit trying to undercut Damien's rates on the Baton Rouge corridor. The dispute had been settled, or Damien had believed it settled. The other operation had backed down, taken a loss, moved their business south. Their operations director at the time had been a man named Curtis Bale. Damien picked up his phone and called Marcus at midnight. "Curtis Bale," he said when Marcus answered. A long silence. "Marcus." "I know that name," Marcus said slowly. "Bale. The Baton Rouge outfit. That was over a year ago." "He didn't leave," Damien said. "He repositioned." He set down the pen. "He's been inside my organization for 7 months through Voss. He spent the first 4 months building the access. And when he had enough, when he knew about Elena, about Lily, about the surgery, about everything that could be used against me, he started using it." The silence on the other end had a different quality now, heavier. "He's not just threatening you," Marcus said. "No. He's building a case, leverage. He wants something from you." "He wants the river contracts," Damien said. "The Baton Rouge corridor. The reason he backed off 14 months ago was because he couldn't compete on price. He needs a different advantage." He stood up. The chair scraped back. "He's going to use my family as that advantage. Damien, put every available resource on Curtis Bale tonight. Location, associates, any properties he controls. I want a complete picture by morning." His voice was still level. The level had calcified into something else by now, something that was no longer costing him effort to maintain. "And Marcus, yeah. Don't tell Voss anything. I need him to keep communicating with Bale. Keep that channel open. You're going to use it." "I'm going to give Bale exactly what he's expecting to hear," Damien said, "until I'm ready to give him something else entirely." He ended the call. He stood in the middle of his study, surrounded by the documentation of a betrayal he had been building toward for 11 months without knowing it, and felt the specific sensation of a situation contracting, the walls of it moving in from every direction, the available space for error getting smaller with every hour. Someone had threatened Lily. Someone had watched Elena. Someone had been inside his organization, fed by a man Damien had trusted with his most private financial life, and had been methodically assembling the tools to break him apart. The situation was serious. He had faced serious situations before and managed them. But this situation had one element none of the previous ones had contained. Elena had a packed suitcase and a rented house, and if she chose the wrong moment to walk out that door, she and Lily would be completely exposed, unprotected, on the street, precisely when Curtis Bale was watching and waiting for exactly that kind of opening. He could not tell her to stay without revealing that he knew she was planning to leave. He could not protect her from outside the house without her knowing she was being protected. And he could not guarantee, sitting in his study at midnight with Voss's records spread before him, that whatever move Bale was building toward wouldn't come before Damien had enough to stop it. The window was open. The night air came through, warm and thick with the smell of the city, exhaust and jasmine and the distant low-current smell of the river. Damien stood at the window and looked out at the street where his wife's car sat in the driveway, and his daughter slept in her room, and a man named Curtis Bale was somewhere in this city, making plans. He thought about what Marcus had said, that powerful men have a way of becoming something. He thought about what Elena had said at the park, that she wanted Lily to know what it looked like to choose freely. He thought about the 11 months of footage and the 11 months of mornings and the 11 months of a life running parallel to his own in this house, carrying a weight he had never been told about and never thought to ask. He had built walls around everything he loved and called it protection, and at no point, not once, in 6 years, had he asked whether the person inside the walls felt protected or imprisoned. He closed the window. He sat back down at the desk. He opened his phone and pulled up the camera feed from the car on Delacroix Street. A still street, empty, the rented house dark and quiet and holding its breath. Then he pulled up the contact he had never used before. A private investigator named Dufresne, who operated entirely off the books, and who owed Damien a favor significant enough that calling it in would cost Dufresne something he could not easily recover. He typed a message. "I need eyes on a man named Curtis Bale. Start tonight. Send location updates every 2 hours. This is the favor." He set the phone down and looked at Voss's records and thought about loyalty and familiarity and the dangerous way they could look identical from a distance. Somewhere down the hall, Elena was asleep. She was planning to leave him. He was building a perimeter around her life without her knowledge. And Curtis Bale, patient, methodical, 14 months in the making, was somewhere in this city deciding when to close the trap he had spent more than a year constructing. waiting for the exact moment when Damien's attention would be split in too many directions to respond in time. Dufresne's response came back in 4 minutes. Understood. On it. Damien set the phone face down on the desk. He picked up the pen. He went back to work. Dufresne's first location update came at 2:14 in the morning. Curtis Bale was at a warehouse on Chupatula Street, 3 blocks from the river. Dufresne's message included a photograph taken from across the street, a loading dock, a black SUV, 2 men standing outside a side entrance smoking. One of the men was Bale. Dufresne had attached a second image, a closer crop, slightly blurred from the zoom distance, but clear enough. Bale was heavy-set, mid-50s, with a face that looked like it had been arranged by someone working from a description rather than a blueprint. Not a violent face, an administrative face. The kind of man who gave orders and let other people absorb the consequences. Damien studied the photograph for a long time. He had seen Bale exactly once before, 14 months ago, at a meeting that was supposed to resolve the Baton Rouge corridor dispute. Bale had sat across a conference table with 2 lawyers and said very little, letting the lawyers do the talking, watching Damien with the particular attention of a man who was measuring something. Damien had read it at the time as caution, standard corporate caution, the kind of posture a man adopted when he knew he was outmatched and was trying not to broadcast it. He had been wrong about that. Bale hadn't been measuring his defeat. He'd been measuring his next approach. Damien forwarded the photograph to Marcus with a single line. Confirm his associates. Morning. He closed the phone and sat in the dark of his study until 4 a.m., which was when the decision he'd been circling finally arrived at its own conclusion without needing him to push it. He could not afford to wait for Bale to move first. The morning moved the way difficult mornings always moved, too fast in the wrong places and too slow everywhere else. Lily had a science project due and couldn't find the poster board, and Elena looked for it in 3 closets before finding it behind the vacuum cleaner. And Damien stood in the kitchen drinking coffee and watched his family navigate the ordinary crisis of a school morning and felt the specific, unpleasant sensation of a man standing in 2 realities at once. You're watching us again, Lily said. She was at the kitchen table with a marker uncapped and the poster board spread in front of her. Am I? You get this face? She made a face, brows slightly together, jaw set. It was, Damien realized, a reasonably accurate impression of his own resting expression. I don't look like that. You look exactly like that. Mom, doesn't he look like that? Elena, standing at the counter, turned and looked at Damien with the same careful evaluation she'd been applying to him for 6 years. Sometimes, she said. He caught her eye and something passed between them. Acknowledgement, maybe. The specific acknowledgement of 2 people who are not saying the real things. He drove Lily to school himself that morning. This was not usual. Tolly typically handled the school run. And Lily was suspicious of the deviation in a way that was equal parts charming and painful. Is something happening? She asked from the back seat. I just wanted to drive you. That's not an answer. It's a complete answer. It's just not the one you want. She considered this with the philosophical patience she applied to most of his evasions. Okay, she said finally. But you should know that when grown-ups do unexpected nice things, it usually means something stressful is happening. He looked at her in the rearview mirror. Where did you hear that? I figured it out. He pulled up to the school and she climbed out and slung her backpack on, and then turned back to the window. Dad? Yeah. Whatever it is. She held the poster board under one arm. You'll figure it out. You always do. She walked away into the stream of other kids, and Damien sat there for a moment with both hands on the wheel and the engine running and a feeling in his chest that he was not going to examine too closely because there was no time and it would not help. He pulled away from the curb and called Marcus. Bale's associates, he said. 3 men, Marcus said. 2 are hired labor. No prior connection to Bale or to anyone in our network. Clean backgrounds, which means Bale specifically recruited people we wouldn't recognize. A pause. The 3rd one is different. Talk. His name is Ray Pittman. He worked river security for the Port Authority for 9 years. Left 18 months ago. Marcus's voice had that flat quality again. The quality that meant he was delivering information he didn't want to deliver. Before that, he did private security work, contract stuff. For who? For a firm out of Metairie, 3-year contract ended about 4 years back. Marcus. The firm's primary client at the time was your father's old operation, before you restructured it. Damien was quiet. Pittman's been in your world before, Marcus said. Not directly connected to you personally, but he knows how you operate. He knows the patterns. He's the one who planned the surveillance, Damien said. Bale doesn't have that kind of operational patience. Pittman does. That's what I think. Which means the photograph, the one mailed to the office, that's Pittman's style. Not a threat, a demonstration. He wanted me to know they could see inside my life. To make you reactive. To make me make a mistake. Damien turned onto St. Charles. The streetcar was ahead of him, moving slow. Where's Pittman now? Last confirmed location was the Chupatulas warehouse. That was 6 hours ago. Dufresne lost him around 3 a.m. He went out a back exit. Find him. Working on it. He ended the call. He was still looking at the streetcar when his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Check your home security system, camera 4. He pulled over. He opened the home security application on his phone and navigated to camera 4, which covered the side entrance of the house, the entrance he used himself, the one he'd come back through the morning he overheard Elena on the phone. The footage was from 40 minutes ago, while he was driving Lily to school. The timestamp read 7:52 a.m. A man was standing at the side entrance. He stood there for exactly 43 seconds, looking directly at the camera. He did not attempt to conceal himself. He was not trying to get inside. He was making a point. The man was Ray Pittman. Damien's hands were very still on the phone. Pittman had been at his house, while Elena was inside. While the only person between Pittman and Elena had been a housekeeper named Vera, who was 61 years old and weighed 130 pounds. He called Marcus. Pittman was at my house this morning. A sharp silence. How? Unknown number texted me the footage. Someone on the inside sent it. Someone who wanted me to see it, and isn't Pittman. He was already pulling back onto the road. Who has access to the home security system? Within your staff, Tolly, Vera, and Harlan Voss. Voss set up the system originally. So Voss just told me Pittman was at my house. The silence stretched differently this time. Why would Voss? Marcus stopped. He's switching sides. Or he never fully committed to Bale's plan in the first place, and Pittman's move this morning scared him. Damien ran the amber light at the corner. Either way, we have a fracture. Use it. How? Bring Voss in. Not to the office. Somewhere neutral. Don't tell him what we know. Let him talk first. If he's frightened, he'll fill the silence. He was back on the street outside his house in 11 minutes. He went in through the front entrance, which was unusual, and Vera appeared from the kitchen with a dish towel and looked at him with the mild alarm of a woman whose routine had been disrupted. Mrs. Ashford is upstairs, she said. She said she was going to... I know. He was already moving toward the stairs. Thank you, Vera. Elena was in the bedroom, dressed, sitting on the edge of the bed with her phone in her hands. She looked up when he appeared in the doorway. Her expression went through 3 things quickly. Surprise, recalibration, the composed neutral surface she kept ready. You're back early, she said. I forgot something. He scanned the room in the way he scanned every room, but exits, sightlines. What had changed? Nothing visible had changed. What are you doing today? Errands. The word was easy, practiced. I need to go to the dry cleaner, and then I was thinking about stopping at that kitchen shop on Magazine Street. She was going to Delacroix Street. He knew it the way he knew water was wet. The errands were real. She would do the dry cleaner and the kitchen shop. But Delacroix Street was the point. He looked at his wife and thought about Pittman standing at the side entrance 40 minutes ago and the red circle drawn around Lily's face and 7 months of Voss feeding the architecture of their private life to a man who had spent 14 months building a mechanism to destroy it. I'll have Tolly drive you, he said. She looked up. I don't need... The car needs a service anyway. It's more efficient. He held her gaze. Tolly will drive you. Something moved across her face. Not quite suspicion, the cousin of it. Damien. Elena. A long pause. She looked at him with the green-gray eyes that he still, after 6 years, could not fully decode. Okay, she said. He nodded. He found the thing he'd pretended to come back for. A cufflink, sitting on the dresser, which was not something he actually needed, but was a convincing enough prop, and he left. Downstairs, he pulled Tolly aside. You drive her everywhere she wants to go today, he said quietly. You don't suggest routes. You don't comment on destinations. You make it completely ordinary. He paused. If she asks to stop somewhere you don't expect, you text me the address before you pull over. Don't make it visible. Tolly looked at him with the uncomplicated steadiness of a man who had spent 20 years following precise instructions from people under pressure. Understood. And Tolly, boss, if anyone approaches the car, anyone at all, you call me first and you do not let Elena out of the vehicle until I tell you it's clear. Tolly's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. He had worked for Damien long enough to read the difference between caution and alarm. Yes, sir, he said. Harlan Voss arrived at the neutral location, a private room in a members' club on Camp Street that Damien maintained for exactly this kind of conversation, at 11:30. Marcus had called him with a story about a tax documentation issue that needed in-person review. Voss had agreed without hesitation, which was either evidence of innocence or evidence of a man who had decided to cooperate and was committing to the performance. He was 62 years old, Voss. Thin, precise, with the careful clothing of a man who had spent his adult life wanting to be taken seriously. He had a yellow legal pad under his arm when he came in, which was an accountant's reflex. You brought a notepad to a meeting because a notepad meant you were there to work. He set it on the table and sat down across from Damien and Marcus and looked at both of them with eyes that moved too quickly to be fully steady. Harlan, Damien said. Damien, a careful nod. I brought the documentation you asked. There's no documentation issue, Damien said. Voss stopped. His hands were flat on the table. They stayed flat. I know about the secondary email account, Damien said. I know about the shell company on Magazine Street. I know about Curtis Bale. He watched Voss the way he watched everything he needed to understand, without expression, without giving anything away. What I don't know yet is how much you actually believe in what Bale is doing versus how much you're just afraid of what he has on you. The room was very quiet. Somewhere on the other side of the wall, someone was having a lunch meeting with glasses clinking and muffled laughter. Voss's throat moved. He approached me 10 months ago, he said. How? Through a mutual contact, someone I knew from before your organization. He said he had information about me, personal information. Voss stopped. His hands were still flat, but his jaw had tightened. From a long time ago, I made mistakes. Before I came to work for you, He stopped again. I'm not interested in your history, Damien said. I'm interested in what you gave him and what you held back. I gave him what he asked for, Elena's movements, the Delacroix address, the surgery payments from 6 years ago. Voss's voice had gone thin. I didn't know what he was going to do with it. He told me it was about leverage against the operation, that he wanted to negotiate the Baton Rouge contracts. He said it wouldn't go further than business. He drew a circle around my daughter's face, Damien said. Voss flinched, visibly, physically, the way a man flinches from something that surprised him. I didn't know about that, he said. His voice was different, smaller. I swear to you, I didn't know Pittman was going to... He stopped. When I saw the camera footage this morning, Pittman at your house. That's when I knew it wasn't what Bale had told me. He looked at Damien directly for the first time since sitting down. I'm the one who sent you the text. I know, Damien said. I'm not... Voss exhaled. I'm not a man who threatens children. No. You're a man who gave someone else the tools to do it and told yourself you didn't know what they were for. Damien let that sit for a moment. What does Bale want? Specifically, not the general shape of it, the specific ask. Voss reached for the legal pad with a hand that wasn't entirely steady. He wants you to sign over the Baton Rouge corridor contracts. River transport rights from the port to the gross terminal. Exclusive. He set the pad down. And he wants confirmation that you'll pull your network back from the East Bank operations. Leave him clear access to the Slidell distribution routes. Marcus made a sound that wasn't quite a word. That's not a negotiation, Damien said. That's half my operation. He knows that. And the leverage he's planning to use to extract that. Voss looked at the table. Elena, he said, and Lily. The word landed in the room and stayed there. He's planning to take them, Damien said. Not a question. Not permanently, he said. Voss stopped, pressed his fingers against the table. He called it a temporary security arrangement, his word. He said once you signed the contracts, he'd return them immediately. He said it was just business. Damien looked at him for a long moment. Then he stood up. Where is he planning to move on them? He said. And when? I don't know exactly when. He said soon, within the week. He wanted... Voss's voice cracked slightly on the next part. He wanted to move while you were still off balance, before you recovered your footing. Another pause. He knows about the storage unit, Elena's plan to leave. He was going to use that too. He said that if Elena was already planning to take the girl and go, moving her wouldn't look like an abduction from the outside. It would look like a wife leaving her husband. The clarity of that, the cold, clean efficiency of using Elena's own plan as camouflage for what Bale intended, hit Damien in a place he didn't have a ready name for. He turned to Marcus. Get Tolly on the phone right now. Marcus already had his phone out. Tolly answered on the first ring. She's at the dry cleaner, he said before Marcus could speak. Everything's normal, no contact. Keep her there until we call back, Marcus said. Do not leave that block. He ended the call and looked at Damien. I need the Delacroix house cleared, Damien said. Whatever she has there, the suitcase, the money, get it out before Bale's people get to it. If they search that address and find her plan, they'll know exactly where she's going to try to run. If I clear the house and Elena goes there, she'll know someone found it. Damien put on his jacket. That's a problem I can manage. Bale having her exit plan is a problem I cannot. He looked at Voss, who was still sitting at the table with his legal pad and his carefully maintained clothing, and his 8 years of trusted service, and his 10 months of managed betrayal. You're going to keep communicating with Bale, Damien said, exactly as you have been. You're going to tell him that I seem distracted and preoccupied, that I appear to be dealing with something in my personal life. He paused. Give him the impression I'm falling apart. And if he asks me to confirm Elena's schedule, give him the schedule I'm going to give you. Damien straightened his jacket, which will be completely accurate except for one detail. Voss nodded. He looked old suddenly. Older than 62. And after this is over? Damien looked at him without warmth, but also without the particular coldness he reserved for men he was finished with. After this is over, you're going to retire. Full pension. You're going to move somewhere you haven't told anyone about yet, and you're going to live quietly. He picked up his phone. And you're going to understand that the only reason that's the outcome is because you sent me that text this morning. Voss said nothing. He picked up the legal pad. He held it for a moment and then set it back down, because there was nothing on it, and there was nothing to write, and the gesture had just been habit. Damien left the room. The next 6 hours moved with the particular compressed urgency of a situation that had stopped waiting for convenient timing. Marcus cleared the Delacroix house, the suitcase, the envelope with the $22,000, the few personal items Elena had quietly transferred over the months, and relocated everything to a secure location Damien controlled. The car on Delacroix was replaced with 2 cars, plain and unremarkable, with men in them who knew what Pittman looked like. Dufresne found Pittman at 2:45 p.m. at a hotel on Tulane Avenue, 3rd floor, room 317. Alone, which meant either Bale's other 2 men were elsewhere or Pittman operated independently of them, which tracked with everything Damien understood about how the man functioned. Elena spent the afternoon being driven by Tolly through a route that included the dry cleaner, the kitchen shop, and at 3:10 p.m., a 20-minute stop on Delacroix Street during which she went inside and found the house empty in ways it had not been empty before. Tolly texted Damien at 3:11. She went in. She's been in there 8 minutes. No movement on the street. At 3:19, she's coming out. Her face is... She looks upset. Pale. She's getting back in the car. Damien was in his car on Poydras Street when the texts came through. He read them and sat still. Elena had gone to her exit and found it disturbed. She didn't know by whom. She would be running the possibilities now. Landlord, coincidence, or the worst option, the one a careful woman with a careful plan would make herself consider, that someone who shouldn't know about Delacroix Street did. His phone rang. Elena. He answered. Hey. Her voice was contained, tight. I'm on my way home. Okay. Can you be there? Can you be home early tonight? He looked at the street in front of him. I'll be there by 5. Okay. A pause. Damien. Yeah. I need to talk to you. The phrase carried the specific weight of a conversation that had been postponed too many times and had finally become unavoidable. I'll be there at 5, he said. He ended the call. He looked at his phone for a moment and then called Marcus. Bale is going to move tonight or tomorrow, he said. He's going to see that I came home early and interpret it as exactly what I want him to interpret it as. A man reacting to personal instability. A man whose attention is divided. He watched a taxi cut in front of him. Set the perimeter tonight. I want eyes on Pittman's Hotel, eyes on the Chupatulas warehouse, and I want someone in position on every route between this house and Delacroix Street. And Elena? Elena's going to try to tell me something tonight, Damien said. And I'm going to have to listen to it without letting her know that her exit plan has already been compromised. That the man threatening our family knows about the storage unit and the rented house and the money. He paused. That everything she built to protect herself and Lily has become the exact tool someone else is planning to use against them. That's a hard conversation to have halfway, Marcus said. I know what it is. He drove home. He arrived at 4:52, which was 8 minutes early, and Elena was already in the kitchen starting dinner. This surprised him. Elena rarely cooked on weeknights, a standing arrangement they'd settled into without ever formalizing. And the fact that she was cooking meant something. Cooking was how Elena steadied herself. He had noticed this years ago and never mentioned it because mentioning things he'd noticed tended to make Elena feel watched, and the last thing he'd wanted was for her to feel watched. The irony of that thought was not lost on him. Lily's not home yet, he said. After school program until 5:30. She was cutting an onion. Her back was to him. The knife was steady. There's wine on the counter if you want. He poured a glass and didn't drink it. He stood on the other side of the kitchen island and looked at the back of his wife's head, the dark hair, the particular set of her shoulders, and waited. She set down the knife. She turned around. Her eyes were dry. She had been crying at some point in the afternoon and had washed her face and rebuilt her composure, and what remained was the aftermath of it, a slight redness at the edges, an eye that was marginally more careful than the other. I need to tell you something, she said. I know. She looked at him sharply. What do you know? That something happened today, that you're scared. He kept his voice level, even. Tell me. She set her hands flat on the counter, the same gesture Voss had made hours ago across a different table, and he recognized it for what it was. A person grounding themselves before saying something they cannot take back. I've been planning to leave you, she said. The kitchen was very quiet. The onion sat on the cutting board. The wine he hadn't drunk was between them on the counter. For how long? He said. Almost a year. He nodded once, said nothing. I rented a house, she said. I saved money. I had... She stopped. I went there today, and someone had been inside. The things I had there, they were gone. Her voice didn't break, but it thickened slightly. Someone knows, Damien. Someone knows I was planning to leave, and they found the house, and they... She stopped again, pressed her hands harder against the counter. I don't know if it's connected to you, to your work. I don't know what it means. He looked at his wife. He looked at the face he had spent 6 years memorizing without meaning to. The face he had watched on security footage and still found unreadable. The face that was right now more unguarded than he had ever seen it. Stripped of the careful composure, showing the raw thing underneath which was not weakness, but was fear. The specific fear of a woman who had done everything right and still found the ground moving. And he made a decision. It's connected to me, he said. She stared at him. There's a man named Curtis Bale, he said. He wants something from me. He's been watching our life for most of the past year. He knows about the house on Delacroix Street. He paused. He knows about Lily. The color left Elena's face in a way he felt physically, like watching something leave a room. Lily, she said. She's safe. She's at the school program. And there are people there right now who are making sure she stays safe. He kept his voice steady, which was the hardest thing he'd done all day. Harder than the meeting with Voss, harder than reading the camera footage. But I need you to hear me. What I'm about to tell you is going to be difficult, and I need you to stay with me through it, because there is no version of tonight that ends well unless we are in the same place on this. Tell me, she said. Her voice had gone very quiet. The fear was still there, but something had moved in front of it. The specific, focused attention of a woman who had not survived what she'd survived by falling apart at inconvenient moments. Bale is going to make a move tonight or tomorrow. He's going to try to use you and Lily as leverage to take half my operation. Damien set down his untouched wine. I've had eyes on him since last night, and I'm ready for him. But the plan only works if you don't go to Delacroix Street again and you don't use the storage unit, and you stay in this house until I tell you it's clear. The silence stretched between them. You knew about Delacroix Street, she said. Yes. How long? 3 days. Her hands were still flat on the counter. Her jaw had tightened. He watched her process the arithmetic of that. 3 days, during which he had met her at the park and driven Lily to school and come home early and said nothing. And he watched her decide what to do with it, working through it visibly in a way she rarely let him see. You cleared the house, she said. It wasn't a question. I had to. Bale's people were going to use whatever you had there to make your disappearance look voluntary. He held her gaze. I moved everything to a location he can't access. Your money, your things, they're intact. My money, she said, and there was something in those 2 words, not bitterness exactly, but the recognition of a woman who understood that her carefully assembled independence had just become a chess piece in someone else's game. He said nothing. There was nothing useful to say. After tonight, she said slowly, after this is over, whatever that looks like. She stopped. We're going to have a very long conversation. I know. Not about Bale. About us. I know. Her phone buzzed on the counter. She looked at it reflexively and then looked at Damien. It was Lily's school program. Pickup reminder, 5:30. Outside, through the kitchen window, the afternoon light was going gold and thin, the way it did in New Orleans in the late afternoon before it went completely dark. A brief, beautiful, entirely unreliable light that made everything look more stable than it was. Damien's phone rang. Marcus. He answered it, and Marcus said without preamble, Pittman left the hotel 20 minutes ago. He's in a vehicle heading toward the Garden District. We have eyes on him, but Damien, a pause that lasted exactly 1 second too long. He's not alone. There are 2 vehicles, and they're not going to Delacroix Street. Damien looked at Elena. They're coming here, Marcus said. Damien was already moving toward the hallway, his hand going to the inside pocket of his jacket where he kept the phone he'd been carrying loaded for the past 24 hours, when Marcus said, There's something else. Bale just sent a message through Voss's channel. He says, another pause. He says Lily isn't at the school program anymore. The floor did not move. The walls did not move. Everything stayed exactly where it was, and the world became very small and very precise. What did you just say? Damien said. Bale says he has Lily, Marcus said. He moved on her 40 minutes ago. Damien, someone on the inside gave him her pickup time. Someone we didn't. Someone we missed. There's a 3rd channel we didn't account for, and he moved on her before we had the perimeter in place. Elena was looking at him. She had heard enough from his voice and his face to know. Her hand went to her mouth. Damien stood in his own hallway with the early evening light coming through the window at the end of it, and the smell of jasmine from the yard and his wife's eyes on him, and the knowledge that everything he had built, every wall, every perimeter, every carefully constructed layer of protection, had just proven itself exactly as inadequate as Elena had always, in the deepest part of herself, feared it would be. He had been wrong about one thing. He had told himself that the people who had been with him longest were not necessarily the most loyal. He had checked Voss. He had checked Marcus. He had run everyone with access to Elena's schedule, everyone with knowledge of the house. He had not checked the one person who had access to Lily's school records and pickup schedule through the family's household management system. The one person who had been in the house every day for 6 years, who knew every routine, who had been present for every conversation he and Elena had ever had in their own kitchen. Vera. The housekeeper's name landed in his chest like something physical. He looked at Elena and said, in a voice that did not belong to the man she thought she knew or the man he thought he was, in a voice that came from somewhere older and less managed. They have Lily, and I'm going to get her back, but I need you to trust me right now more than you've ever trusted me in your life. Elena dropped her hand from her mouth. Her face did the thing it had done in the hospital 6 years ago when the surgeon came out. Not relief, not yet, but the decision to hold together, to function, to be the thing that didn't break. "Go," she said. He went. He was in the car before the front door finished closing behind him. Tolly was already at the wheel. Marcus had called him 30 seconds ahead of Damien, which was the kind of operational reflex that 11 years built into a person, and the car was moving before Damien had fully pulled the door shut. The evening had gone dark faster than it should have, the way New Orleans evenings sometimes did in October, dropping the light without warning, and the streets of the Garden District scrolled past the windows in amber and shadow. "Where?" Damien said. "Marcus is pulling Bale's phone signal. He's got a relay through the tower on Tulane Avenue. The signal's consistent with the warehouse district. Chupatulas, or close to it." Tolly's eyes were on the road. His voice had the flat, functional calm of a man who had been in worse situations and knew that calm was a tool, not an emotion. "Pittman's vehicle's turned off at Magazine. They may have doubled back. They're not coming to the house anymore." "No. Because Bale already has what he needs." Damien's jaw set. The house was a distraction. Keep us looking one direction while Pittman moved on the school. His phone rang. "Marcus." "Talk," Damien said. "Vera's gone. I sent someone to the house address we had on file for her. She hasn't been there in 3 days. Neighbor says she had luggage." Marcus's voice was tight. "She's been running a parallel channel to Bale for at minimum 2 months. I missed it because she communicated through a burner and never used any device connected to our network." "How did Bale get to her?" "Money, probably. She has a son. He's been in financial trouble, medical debt, gambling, significant." A pause. "Damien, I should have run the household staff with the same rigor I ran the operation staff. That's on me. We settle that later. Where is Lily?" "Best current read is the Chupatulas warehouse. Bale's signal hasn't moved in 40 minutes, which means he's stationary. He's waiting." Marcus paused. "He sent a second message through Voss's channel 6 minutes ago. He wants you to call a number. He'll give you the contract terms over the phone. He thinks I'm going to negotiate. He thinks you don't have a choice." Damien watched the city move past the window. A couple on a porch, a restaurant with its lights on warm, the ordinary evening of people who did not know what was happening 3 miles away. "What do we have near Chupatulas right now?" he said. 2 cars. Dufresne and one of his men on the south approach. I've got Rivera watching the riverside. He positioned before Bale moved on the school, so he's already in place and Bale doesn't know he exists. The building layout. I pulled the Port Authority records 20 minutes ago. Single main floor, loading dock on the riverside, 3 entry points, front, dock, and a side access on the north wall. No second level, 2 interior partition walls. A beat. If Lily's inside, she's most likely in the back section, away from the dock. That's where the permanent walls are. Damien thought about a 9-year-old in a warehouse that smelled like river water and diesel and old wood, and he compressed that thought down to a single point of fuel and moved on. "I'm going in the front," he said. "Damien, Bale is expecting a phone call. I'm going to give him a meeting instead. He won't move on Lily while I'm in the room because Lily is his leverage, and leverage only works while the other person believes the threat is real." He kept his voice level, analytical, the voice of a man running a business problem. "Rivera holds the dock side. Dufresne covers the north wall. Nobody moves until I have eyes on Lily. And if Pittman's in there with the gun on her head before you get through the front door?" "Then I'll deal with Pittman," Damien said. "That's always been on the table." Marcus was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. "You're going in alone." "I'm going in first." "There's a difference." "Not a meaningful one." "Marcus." Damien's voice didn't change. "Set the perimeter. I'll be there in 8 minutes." He ended the call and looked at Tolly. "Drop me at the north corner of the block," he said. "Then you pull to the south end and you wait. You don't come in unless I call you." Tolly said nothing for a moment. The car turned onto a street that ran parallel to the river, and the smell of the water came through the ventilation. That particular New Orleans river smell, muddy and vast and ancient. The smell of a city built on ground that had no business holding a city. "I've known you 14 years, Tolly said. "I know. You've done stupid things before. I know that too. This is near the top." "Noted." Damien straightened his jacket. Inside the jacket, at the back of his waistband, was a compact 9mm he'd carried loaded since the morning after the photograph arrived. He had not used a weapon in 11 years. His hands remembered the weight of one the way hands always remember things the mind tries to store elsewhere. North corner. Tolly pulled over. Damien got out. The night air hit him. Warm, river thick, the smell of something faintly sweet from a food truck 2 blocks over. He stood on the sidewalk for one full second and looked at the warehouse at the end of the block. A large, low building with a corrugated metal exterior. Lights visible through the high windows, the loading dock facing the river with its back to him. He walked toward it. The front entrance was an industrial door set in the flat face of the building. Steel frame, no window, a keypad lock that had been overridden, the panel hanging loose and dark. Someone had cut the power to the lock. Pittman, probably. Methodical. Damien pushed the door open and walked in. The interior was larger than it looked from outside, which warehouses always were. High ceiling, exposed beams, the smell of machine oil and river damp and something else. Fast food, recently delivered, the particular smell of men who had been waiting in a confined space for several hours. Fluorescent lights, maybe a third of them working, creating an uneven yellow wash that left the far corners in shadow. There were 4 men visible. 2 were stationed near the loading dock, backs to the water. They registered Damien's entrance and their hands moved toward their sides but did not complete the motion, which meant someone had told them to wait. One was standing near the partition wall on the right side of the building, arms crossed, with the specific physical stillness of a man positioned as a perimeter rather than a participant. The 4th was Ray Pittman. Pittman was standing in the center of the open floor with his hands in the pockets of a jacket that was too heavy for the temperature, which told Damien where the weapon was. He was looking at Damien the way a man looks at something he's been expecting. Not surprise, not alarm. Recognition. The settling of a calculation that had finally resolved. "You didn't call," Pittman said. "I'm here instead," Damien said, more efficient. "You came alone." "Did I?" Pittman's eyes moved to the door behind Damien, then back. He was intelligent. That came through clearly in person in a way it hadn't fully from the security footage. Not educated, not polished, but functionally intelligent in the specific way of a man who had spent 2 decades thinking about the angles of situations. "Curtis is expecting a phone call," Pittman said. "Curtis can come out and have a conversation," Damien said. "Or we can stand here and I can look at whatever door he's behind and he can decide how long he wants his night to be." A pause. Then a door in the partition wall opened. Curtis Bale was shorter than the photograph had suggested. People were often shorter in person. He walked into the main floor with the measured pace of a man who wanted to project control and was working slightly harder at it than he would have liked. He was wearing a suit that had been expensive once. His hands were at his sides. "You're faster than I expected," Bale said. "You took my daughter," Damien said. "Speed was the only available gear." "She's not your daughter, legally speaking." "Keep talking," Damien said. "See where it gets you." Bale stopped about 10 feet away. He looked at Damien with the same measuring quality Damien remembered from the conference table 14 months ago. The continuous, recalibrating assessment of a man who was counting on the math working out a particular way. "I want the Baton Rouge corridor," Bale said. "The river contracts, the Gross Tate terminal access, and a clear field on the East Bank routes. You sign tonight, you have the girl back in 20 minutes. And if I don't sign, then this takes longer." Bale's voice was flat. "She's not in danger. I want to be clear about that. I'm not in the business of hurting children." You drew a circle around her face. "That was communication, not a promise." "Where is she?" Damien said. "She's comfortable. She's been given food. Bale paused. "She's been told that her father arranged a special pickup today, that there was a change in plans." Something moved through Damien's chest, the image of Lily being told a story, being kept calm by a lie that used his name as cover. And he controlled it with the specific, learned effort of a man who had been controlling things like that since he was 8 years old. "I want to see her," Damien said. "Before any conversation about contracts happens. That's not negotiable." Bale looked at Pittman. Pittman looked at Damien for a long moment. His hand was still in his jacket pocket. Then he nodded once, slightly, the nod of a man who has run the calculation and found that the request is low enough risk to grant. Bale gestured toward the partition door. They walked through it. The back section of the warehouse was smaller, lit by a single standing lamp plugged into a generator. There was a folding table, a chair, a cooler on the floor. And sitting on a second chair against the far wall, still wearing her school backpack, which was the detail that hit hardest. The backpack, the fact that she'd had it on when they took her, that she hadn't even had time to put it down, was Lily. She looked up when the door opened. When she saw Damien, her face did the thing it had done in the park, opened completely, all the way, no reserve, and then immediately rearranged itself into something more controlled, because she was 9 years old and she had apparently inherited his instinct for reading a room. "Hey," she said. "Hey." He kept his voice ordinary. He walked to her and crouched down in front of her so they were at eye level. He looked at her face, her hands, the way she was sitting. No visible distress beyond the paleness, the slight tightness around her eyes. "You okay?" "I'm okay." She held his gaze. "Is Mom okay?" "Mom's fine. She's at home." Lily looked at him for a moment with those eyes that were his own eyes somehow, even without the biology. "You're going to get me out of here," she said. It wasn't a question. It was the same thing she'd said outside the school that morning about figuring things out. "Yeah," he said. "I am." He stood up and turned back to Bale. "All right," he said. "Let's talk contracts." They went back through the partition door. Damien's phone buzzed in his jacket pocket. He did not take it out. He knew who it was. Marcus, monitoring, watching for the signal Damien had prearranged. One missed call meant Lily was confirmed safe and the perimeter could tighten. He reached into his pocket and rejected the call without looking at it. "Paperwork," Bale said. He produced a document from inside his jacket. Folded, slightly worn at the crease. He'd been carrying it for a while. The kind of man who prepared his props in advance. "It's a preliminary transfer agreement. Your legal team can formalize it, but I need your signature on this tonight as good faith." Damien took the document. He unfolded it. He read it. It was exactly what Voss had described. The Baton Rouge corridor, the Gross Tate terminal, East Bank clearance. Signed over with an efficiency that suggested Bale had used a real attorney, someone who understood the language of maritime transport contracts well enough to make this one legally coherent. "You put a lot of work into this," Damien said. 14 months, Bale said. "I'm thorough." "You are." Damien refolded the document. "You're also operating on a timeline that doesn't account for a few things." Bale's expression didn't change. "What things?" "Your man Pittman visited my house this morning." Damien set the folded document on a nearby surface, a crate, the closest flat thing. "You sent the photograph to my office. You've been feeding information through Voss for 7 months and through my housekeeper for 2. He paused. "You know a lot about my life. What you don't know is what I've been doing for the past 72 hours. Something shifted in Bale's eyes. Not fear. Not yet. But the first movement of a man who is beginning to sense that his calculation may have an error in it. "Talk," Bale said. "You have 4 men in this building," Damien said. 2 at the dock, 1 on the partition wall, and Pittman. On the riverside of the dock, you have a man named Rivera, who's been in position since before you moved on the school, and who you don't know exists because he's not in my regular operation. He's independent, and you didn't account for people outside my network." He watched Bale's face. "On the north wall, you have Dufresne, who has been tracking Pittman since 1 in the morning, and on the south approach, you have 2 more people I'm not going to name because you don't need to know everything." Bale's jaw had tightened. "The building is surrounded," Damien said. "Not by my usual people, who you've been studying for 14 months. By people you've never seen before." He kept his voice at the same register, conversational, unhurried, the tone of a man explaining something that was already finished. "You can signal Pittman right now if you want. He'll reach for his jacket, and then everyone in this building is going to have a very bad night." Bale looked at Pittman. Pittman looked at Damien. Pittman's hand was in his pocket. His eyes were doing the thing that trained men's eyes did in moments like this, running the geometry, calculating angles and distances and probabilities, working the problem the way he had worked every problem for 2 decades. Damien watched him work it and waited. Pittman's hand came out of his pocket. Empty. Bale made a sound that wasn't quite a word. "Here's what happens now," Damien said. He picked up the contract document. He folded it once, twice, and put it in his own inside pocket. "You're going to have your men step away from their positions. Lily is going to walk out the front door with me. And then you and I are going to have a different conversation, a real one, about what you actually want from the Baton Rouge situation, because what you've put in this contract is not a business arrangement. It's a hostile seizure, and I don't accept hostile seizures, but I'm occasionally open to restructuring negotiations that begin with my daughter being safely returned. Bale stared at him. His face had gone through several things in the past 2 minutes, and was currently sitting at something between fury and a reluctant, unwilling recalculation. "You're offering me a deal," Bale said, "after this." "I'm offering you a way out of a building that is currently surrounded," Damien said. "The deal comes after, if you're interested in one." He paused. "The alternative is that Pittman makes a decision, someone gets hurt, and your 14 months of preparation ends with you facing a list of charges that starts with kidnapping and doesn't get more comfortable from there." Pittman spoke for the first time since the initial exchange at the front door. His voice was lower than expected, more considered. "He's not bluffing," he said. He was talking to Bale, not Damien. Bale's jaw worked. His hands, both of them, visible, at his sides, tightened and released. "Get the girl," he said. Pittman went through the partition door. He came back with Lily 30 seconds later. Lily still had her backpack on. She walked into the main floor and her eyes went directly to Damien, and she crossed to him without being told, stopping at his side, and he put his hand on her shoulder and felt the slight tremor in her that she was working to control. "We're going," he said to her quietly. "Yeah," she said. They walked to the front door. Damien's hand was on Lily's shoulder the entire way. He did not look back. Looking back would have communicated something he was not willing to communicate, that the space between the front door and where Bale's men stood was anything other than completely controlled territory. He pushed the door open. Outside, the night air hit them and Lily exhaled, a single, full exhale, the sound of a child releasing something she'd been holding for hours. And Damien's phone was already in his hand, calling Marcus. "Front door," he said. "She's with me." "Copy," Marcus said, and in the distance, from the south end of the block, a car started moving. Tolly was already at the curb. Damien put Lily in the back seat and got in beside her, and the car was moving before the door was fully shut. Lily sat beside him and looked at her backpack in her lap and said nothing for about 30 seconds. Then, "Those were not very nice people." "No," he said, "they weren't." "The woman told me you'd arranged a special pickup." She looked at him sideways. "I knew that wasn't true." "How?" "Because you would have texted me. You always text me when things change." She held his gaze. "You didn't text." He looked at his daughter, the specific, particular person she was, the details that belonged entirely to her and no one else, the mind that moved sideways through problems and came out somewhere accurate, and something in his chest made a sound he didn't quite have the vocabulary for. "You're right," he said. "I should have texted." She looked at the window. The city moved past. "Is it over?" "Not completely, but the worst part is." She nodded, accepting this with the same practical patience she applied to most of his incomplete answers. "Mom's really at home?" "She's at home." "Is she—" Lily stopped, started again. "She seemed worried this morning. Before school, she had the face." "What face?" "The one she gets when she's scared, but she doesn't want me to know she's scared." Lily looked at him. "You have that face too, actually. You both do it. It's like a family thing." Damien said nothing for a moment. The car turned north, away from the river, heading toward the Garden District. "We're working on some things," he said. "Your mom and I." "I know." "You know." "I'm 9, not 4. She pulled one strap of her backpack through her hands, a fidgeting gesture he recognized from years of watching her think. "Are you going to fix it?" The question was direct. Completely direct. The way children's questions were when they'd decided a subject had been avoided long enough. "I'm going to try," he said. She considered this. "That's a better answer than 'everything's fine.'" "I know." "Okay." She leaned against his arm. Not dramatically, just the quiet, habitual lean of a child who was tired and had decided the danger was sufficiently past. "I'm hungry. Those guys gave me a sandwich, but it was bad. We'll stop. The po' boy place on Magazine. It's probably closed." "It's not. It's open until 10. I've been monitoring this." He almost laughed. He didn't, quite, but the thing that happened in his face was close enough that Lily noticed and smiled at the window, satisfied. Marcus called at the same moment that the po' boy place came into view ahead on Magazine Street, lit up and open as Lily had correctly predicted. Bale's men are standing down, Marcus said. Pittman walked out the north wall exit 3 minutes after you left. He's moving toward the river. Dufresne's tracking him. A pause. Bale's still inside. He hasn't moved. He's thinking, Damien said. About your offer? About his options, which are more limited than they were 2 hours ago, and he knows it. Damien watched Tolly pull over in front of the po' boy shop. Keep eyes on Pittman. Don't move on him yet. I want to know where he goes. And Bale? I'll deal with Bale tomorrow. Tonight is done. He ended the call. Elena was on the front steps when they pulled up to the house. She had her phone in her hand and she was not sitting down. She was standing, which was what she did when sitting was not a thing her body was capable of. She came down the steps before the car fully stopped and Lily climbed out, and Elena's arms went around her and neither of them said anything immediately, which was the right call. Damien stood on the sidewalk and watched his wife hold his daughter, and the jasmine on the fence was faint in the night air, and a car passed on the street behind him, and the ordinary world continued its ordinary motion all around this one specific moment of relief. Elena looked up over Lily's shoulder. She looked at Damien. There was nothing easy in the look, nothing resolved. 6 years of questions and 11 months of a packed suitcase and a night of fear and a truth she now knew he'd been sitting on for 3 days. All of that was in the look, and he didn't try to simplify it. He held it. She looked away first, pulling Lily closer, and he walked up the steps and held the door open for them. Inside, Lily ate leftover soup and part of the po' boy they'd stopped for, and she was in bed by 9, asleep in the abrupt, complete way she'd had since infancy, as if sleep were a switch and she'd simply found it. Damien sat at the edge of her bed for 3 minutes after her breathing evened out, which was something he never did in front of anyone and did not need to explain. He found Elena in the kitchen. She was at the sink, not doing anything. Just standing at the sink in the quiet, the way he'd seen her stand there the morning of the phone call with her mother, looking out at the backyard where the jasmine was dark against the fence. He stood in the doorway. "She's asleep," he said. "I know. I heard her." He came into the kitchen. He stood on the other side of the island. The same position as before, the same geography, but the room felt different from earlier in the evening, the way a room always felt different after something significant had moved through it. "I'm going to tell you something," Elena said without turning around, "and I need you to not interrupt me until I'm done." "Okay." She turned around. Her eyes were dry. She had cried at some point. In Lily's room, maybe, or before he came back, he couldn't tell. And she'd washed her face again, and her eyes were clear and direct. "I built that exit because I was afraid," she said. "Not of something you'd done. Not because you hurt me or threatened me or gave me a specific reason." She stopped. "I built it because of what you might become. What I was convinced, eventually, that powerful men become." She held his gaze. "I was running from a story. Not from you." He said nothing. She'd asked him not to interrupt. "And tonight," she stopped again. Her jaw worked. "Tonight I watched you walk out that door to go get her, and I thought—" She pressed her fingers against the counter. "I thought, whatever else this man is, he is not running from that." Damien looked at his wife. "The exit plan," she said. "The money, the house, the storage unit. I'm not saying I was wrong to build it. I needed to know it existed. I needed to know I could choose." She exhaled. "But I want you to know that I understand the difference now between having a choice and using it." He came around the island. He stopped in front of her, close, within arm's reach, closer than he typically stood in conversations that were costing them both something. "Elena," he said, "I'm not done." "I know. I just needed to say your name." He looked at her. "I've been in this marriage for 6 years, and I've never once told you what it looks like from my side. What I built and why, and what I was trying to give you with all of it." He stopped. "That's a failure. That's mine. And I'm not going to pretend it's a communication style difference or a personality thing. It's a failure." She looked at him for a long time. "We need help," she said. "From someone outside this house. Someone who is not Marcus or my mother." "I know. I mean a professional." "I know what you mean. And it doesn't fix tonight. It doesn't fix the storage unit. It doesn't fix the fact that you knew about Delacroix Street for 3 days and didn't. It doesn't fix any of it, he said. It starts something. That's all it does. She looked at his face. She looked at the suit he'd worn into a warehouse and walked out of with their daughter on his shoulder, the suit that was creased now in the way of a man who had been in a car, and then on a street, and then in a building that smelled like river water. And whatever she found in his face in that moment, she kept to herself. "There's one more thing I need to tell you," he said. "What?" He looked at her steadily. "The money Lily's surgery cost, 6 years ago, the full amount." Elena's eyes shifted slightly. "You thought it was the insurance and the fundraiser your colleagues ran," he said. "It wasn't. The insurance covered about a third. The fundraiser covered less than 10%. He paused. "I paid the rest. Directly, through a structure that kept my name off the paperwork, because I didn't want you to feel obligated to me. Because we barely knew each other, and the obligation would have been—" He stopped. "It would have changed things. I didn't want it to change things." Elena's expression moved through several places quickly, the way her expression moved when she was processing something significant and not letting it land on her face until she was ready. "How much?" she said. He told her the number. The kitchen was very quiet. "That's not—" She stopped. "That's not a small number, Damien." "No. You paid that for a child you'd known for 3 months. I paid it because she needed it, and I had it, and the alternative was unacceptable." His voice was completely steady. "And because you were sitting in a hospital hallway at 2 in the morning eating a bag of chips from a vending machine, and you had the same face you had tonight when Lily walked out of that building. The face where you're not breaking, but everything is costing you something." He looked at her. "I didn't want it to cost you that." Elena put both hands flat on the counter and looked at them. She stood like that for a long moment. A woman doing the arithmetic of 6 years of a marriage, adding up what she thought she knew against what she was learning, recalculating the distance between silence and indifference, between protection and control, between a man who didn't say things and a man who couldn't feel them. When she looked up, her eyes were wet. She didn't look away. "You have to learn to talk to me," she said. "That's not optional anymore. None of this—" She gestured at the space between them, at the house, at the night they'd just come through. "None of this works if you keep building things and saying nothing about them." "I know," he said. "I mean it. I know you mean it." She looked at him for another long moment. Then she reached out and took hold of his jacket lapel. Not a gesture of warmth exactly. More like a woman taking hold of something to steady herself, or to hold it still while she made a decision about it. "Bail," she said. "It's not over. Tomorrow. I'll deal with it tomorrow." "And the people he has, Pittman. Marcus has eyes on him." She released his lapel. She smoothed it once, reflexively, the automatic gesture of a woman who had been straightening the same jacket collar for 6 years. "Go check the doors," she said. He went. He checked the front door, the side entrance, the back lock, the garage. He stood in each doorway for a moment and looked out at the dark and thought about tomorrow and bail and the contract in his pocket and what came next. He came back to the kitchen. Elena was still at the counter. She had poured herself a glass of wine, and she was holding it without drinking it, which was the same thing he'd done with his glass 2 hours ago. His phone buzzed. "Marcus." Pittman stopped moving. "He's at an address in Metairie, pulling ownership records now. Bale left the warehouse 10 minutes ago. He's heading toward the CBD." And then, 30 seconds later, a second message that arrived while Damien was still reading the first. "Damien. The Metairie address. It's registered to a company called Heartline Holdings. I've seen that name before. I'm going back through the files right now, but I know I've seen it, and I can't— Wait. Damien held the phone. Elena was watching him. "It's your father's old company," Marcus wrote. "Heartline Holdings was the shell your father used for the original river contracts. 25 years ago, before you took over." Damien read the message twice. "Pittman didn't come into your world 18 months ago," Marcus wrote. "He was already in it. He worked for your father's operation through Heartline. That's the connection to your world. It wasn't the Port Authority. It was never the Port Authority. He's been around the edges of your operation for 20 years, and we never saw him because we never looked that far back." Damien set the phone down on the counter. He looked at Elena. She read his face the way she'd been reading it for 6 years. Imperfectly, incompletely, but with the accumulated knowledge of a woman who had been paying attention even when he thought no one was. "What?" she said. "This isn't just about Bale wanting the Baton Rouge corridor," he said slowly. "Bale is the front. Pittman is something else." "What is Pittman?" Damien looked at the phone, at Marcus's last message sitting on the screen. "He's the original," he said. "He's someone who was there before I was, who watched me build everything I've built, and who has been waiting long enough and patiently enough that I never thought to look behind me far enough to find him." The house was quiet. Lily was asleep. The Jasmine was somewhere in the dark outside. Damien picked up the phone and called Marcus. "The Heartline records," he said. "Go back to the beginning. Everything my father touched, every name, every contract." He paused. "Because I think Bale is just the pressure. Pittman is the plan. And the plan has been running longer than 14 months. "How much longer?" Marcus said. Damien looked at his wife in her kitchen, in the house they'd shared for 6 years, in the city that had been his family's city for a generation before it was his. "Since before I started," he said. Marcus called back at 11:47 with the name. Not Pittman's name. Pittman was already known. The name Marcus had found, buried in 25 years of shell company filings and dissolved partnerships and river transport contracts that predated Damien's involvement in any of it, was the name at the origin point. The person who had first assembled the Heartline holding structure, who had used it to control the river corridor before Damien's father inherited access to it, who had watched a young Damien dismantle and restructure his father's operation and absorb those contracts into something cleaner and more profitable and entirely out of reach. The name was Gerald Crane. Damien sat down when Marcus said it, which was not something he typically did in response to information. He sat down on the kitchen stool and held the phone and looked at the middle distance. "Talk," he said. Crane ran the original Heartline structure starting in the early 90s. He was the silent partner behind your father's river access. Your father had the relationships, Crane had the capital and the legal architecture. When your father died and you took over and restructured, you bought out the active partners. But Crane was a silent partner. His name wasn't in the active documentation. Marcus's voice had the quality of a man who had been reading files for several hours and had arrived somewhere he hadn't expected. You never bought him out because you didn't know he existed. "And he's been sitting on that position for 25 years, Damien said. "He's 71 years old. He's been in declining health for the past 3 years. I found medical records through the insurance filings attached to one of the shell structures. He's not going to be around much longer." Marcus paused. "I think this is his last move. He wants what he believes he's owed from the original Heartline arrangement, and he's using Bale and Pittman to collect it, and he timed it for now because now is the only window he has left." Damien looked at Elena. She was still at the counter, still holding the wine she hadn't drunk, watching his face with the patient, calibrated attention of a woman who had learned to read a situation through the body of a man who said very little. "Where is he?" Damien said. "He's been in New Orleans this whole time. He has a house in Lakeview. He's lived there for 15 years. A pause. "He's been here, Damien. While you built everything you built, he was 15 minutes away." "Does Bale know the full structure? Does he know Crane is behind him?" "Based on what I can tell, Bale knows he's working for a principal. He may not know the details. Pittman almost certainly knows everything." Marcus exhaled. "Pittman worked for Crane before he worked for your father's operation. That's the actual chain. Crane to Pittman, Pittman to Heartline, Heartline to your father to you restructuring everyone out, and Crane waiting." 25 years, Damien said again quietly. "Some men are patient." "Some men have nothing else," Damien said. He ended the call. He sat in his kitchen at nearly midnight and thought about a 71-year-old man in a house in Lakeview who had spent a quarter of a century watching an empire grow on ground he believed was partly his, who had finally decided that the time remaining to him was short enough to stop watching. He thought about his father, about a man who had made deals without fully disclosing them, who had accepted capital and access from someone he didn't bring into the light, who had died on 3 stairs in a rented house in Metairie and left his son an inheritance with a hidden creditor no one had ever mentioned. He thought about the photograph with the circle drawn around Lily's face, and about Lily eating bad soup in a warehouse, and about Elena building an exit because the weight of what she didn't know about him felt identical to the weight of things she had reason to fear. He looked at Elena. "I need to go out again," he said.
She set down the wine. Damien, one more thing.
The last one. Tonight. Tonight. He held her gaze. I need to talk to the man who started this. Not Bale, not Pittman. The original. He paused. And I need to do it tonight because he's the kind of old that doesn't give you a second window. Elena looked at him for a long moment. Her expression moved through the now familiar sequence: resistance, assessment, the calculation of whether she trusted him, and arrived somewhere he had not seen her arrive before in quite this way. Come back, she said. Not be careful. Not call me. Just come back. Yes, he said.
Gerald Crane's house in Lakeview was a double shotgun on a block that had flooded badly in 2005 and been rebuilt to look almost exactly like it had before, which was a choice the neighborhood had made collectively and which gave the streets a slightly uncanny quality, familiar and reconstructed at once. The lights were on inside. It was nearly 1 in the morning and the lights were on. Damien rang the bell. A long pause. Then the sound of something moving inside. Slow, deliberate movement, the movement of a man who took stairs carefully and doors at his own pace. The door opened. Gerald Crane was not what Damien had assembled in his mind from the abstract outline of the man's history. He was smaller, fine-boned, with white hair gone thin on top, and a face that had once been angular and was now settling towards something more skeletal. He was wearing a cardigan over a collared shirt at 1 in the morning, which suggested either insomnia or the habits of a man who no longer distinguished much between day and night. He looked at Damien without surprise. I thought it would be tomorrow, Crane said. I move fast, Damien said. Crane stepped back from the door. Come in. The house was neat in the way that older people's houses were sometimes neat. Not clean exactly, but organized. Everything in a place it had occupied for years. The specific order of a life that had settled into its own permanent arrangement. There were bookshelves. There was a desk near the window with a lamp on it and papers in stacks. There was a medical oxygen unit against the wall beside an armchair, the tubing coiled and waiting. Crane lowered himself into the armchair. He moved carefully, the way people moved when several things hurt, and you'd learned which movements cost more than others. He did not offer Damien a seat, and Damien did not sit. You found the Heartline records, Crane said. My associate did. It took him most of the night. I didn't hide them especially well. Crane's voice was dry. Not weak. Dry. The specific dryness of a man who had economized on excess for a long time. I wasn't certain you'd ever look. You restructured so quickly after your father. You were thorough. Most men who are thorough don't think to look behind what they built. My father knew you were his partner, Damien said. Your father and I had an understanding, a handshake arrangement, as we called them then. Crane's hands were folded in his lap. His fingers were slightly swollen at the knuckles, the hands of a man who had worked for decades before becoming someone who worked at desks. When he died, I assumed we would formalize things with you, that someone would tell you. His attorneys... He stopped. His attorneys apparently failed to mention me. Or he failed to mention you to them. A slight pause. That's possible. Why didn't you come to me directly? Damien said. 25 years ago, when I was restructuring, you could have walked through a door. You were 28 years old and you came into that operation like a man burning evidence, Crane said, with the first hint of something that might have been admiration under different circumstances. You restructured everything in 6 months. By the time I decided to make contact through appropriate channels, the appropriate channels had all changed. The people I knew were either gone or working for you, and the people working for you had every reason to bring my contact to your attention in a way that didn't benefit me. He looked at Damien steadily. So I waited. For 25 years. I waited, Crane said again, simply. I had other things. It wasn't only waiting. Damien looked at the oxygen unit, at the medical documentation on the desk. He could see the header of a form from a cardiology practice uptown, at the organized, contracted life of a man who had run out of time to be patient any longer. Bale, Damien said. Curtis Bale worked for me in the 90s. He was capable, but not exceptional. He needed direction. Crane's voice was matter-of-fact. Ray Pittman I've known for 30 years. He's exceptional. He's also loyal, which is rarer. He took my daughter, Damien said. The room shifted slightly. Not physically,
but the quality of the air in it changed. Crane's folded hands tightened very slightly at the knuckles. "That was not the plan I approved," he said. "What plan did you approve?" "Pressure. Business pressure. The photograph? Yes. The surveillance? Yes. I approve demonstrating to you that your private life was visible to me, that you were not as insulated as you believed." He looked at Damien with eyes that were faded but not dim. "I did not approve taking the child. Pittman made that decision independently. He told me it was necessary to accelerate the timeline because he believed you were moving toward countermeasures faster than anticipated." Crane paused. He was right about that. But it was not what I asked for. Damien studied the old man's face, looking for the performance in it, the calculated presentation of a man trying to separate himself from the worst outcome of his own plan, to claim the credit for the strategy while disclaiming the method. He looked for that, and he found something more complicated. He found what appeared to be genuine displeasure, the displeasure of a man who had planned something careful and watched it become something he didn't recognize. "You have a granddaughter," Damien said. Crane looked at him sharply. "I did my homework too," Damien said. "Your daughter's girl. She's 7. A long pause. "Yes," Crane said. "Then you understand what last night cost," Damien said. "And I'm not going to pretend that understanding changes what happened. But I'm going to tell you that the man you sent to do this took it further than you intended, and the man you chose to manage him is the reason this ends the way it ends." "How does it end?" Crane said. Damien walked to the desk. He set the folded contract, Bale's contract, the one he'd taken from the warehouse, on the desk surface. He looked at it for a moment. "You're owed something," he said. "From the original Heartline arrangement, a percentage of the river corridor revenue going back to when my father first accessed those contracts." He looked at Crane. "I'm not going to debate whether it's a legal obligation. It's not. Nothing in the current documentation reflects your position, and I have attorneys who would be very comfortable explaining that." He paused. "But my father made a handshake deal with you, and handshake deals have a weight that doesn't always show up in paperwork." Crane said nothing. He was watching Damien with the full, careful attention he'd probably given everything for 71 years. "Pittman goes," Damien said. "Whatever arrangement you have with him, whatever loyalty you feel, it ends. He made a decision last night that he wasn't authorized to make, and it will not happen again." He kept his voice flat. "Bale goes. He's out of the Baton Rouge situation entirely. He doesn't get the corridor, he doesn't get the East Bank access, he gets nothing from this except the lesson." "And me," Crane said, "you get a settlement, a real one, calculated against a reasonable estimate of the Heartline percentage over the past 25 years, discounted for the fact that you've been conducting a covert operation against my family." Damien held the old man's gaze. "You get enough to live whatever time you have left without this hanging over you. And in exchange, every piece of documentation you have on the Heartline position, every file, every communication, comes to me. And this is done." Crane looked at him for a long time. "You came here to make a deal," he said. "I came here to end something that should have ended before it started," Damien said. "The deal is how that happens without more damage. And if I refuse, then I use the next 6 months to build a legal case that exposes the Heartline structure, the surveillance operation, and the kidnapping of a minor, and you spend whatever time you have left in a way that doesn't look like the cardigan and the armchair." Damien paused. "I don't want that. Not because I'm concerned about your comfort, because it's expensive and slow, and it doesn't give me what I actually want, which is for this to be finished." Crane's folded hands moved. He unfolded them, placed both palms flat on his knees, and looked at them. He had the hands of a man who had worked with them at some point, the history of it still in the shape of the knuckles, the width of the palm. "Pittman won't accept being sent away," Crane said. "Pittman doesn't get a vote. He's not someone who—" "I'll handle Pittman," Damien said. "That's not your problem anymore." Crane looked up. In his eyes, there was something that had not been there at the beginning of the conversation, a loosening, the specific loosening of a man who has been carrying a weight long enough that putting it down feels like a physical sensation. "Your father," Crane said, "would have shouted at me for an hour and then signed nothing." "I know," Damien said. "You're not very much like him." "I know that too." Crane reached out and picked up the Bale contract from the desk. He looked at it. He turned it over. He set it back down, and the gesture was final.
the gesture of a man filing something under finished. "Send your attorneys in this morning," he said. Damien left. Pittman was the harder conversation, and it happened the following afternoon in a conference room in a building Damien controlled, with Marcus present and two men outside the door, and no pretense that it was anything other than what it was. Pittman came because Damien asked him to come, and he came because he was a man who understood that the geometry of the situation had inverted overnight, and that showing up was the only move that gave him any agency in the outcome. He sat down across from Damien and looked at him without the jacket pocket hand this time. His hands were on the table. He was, Damien noticed, more tired than he'd looked in the warehouse. The specific tiredness of a man who had run a long operation and felt it conclude beneath him. "Crane made a deal," Pittman said. "It wasn't a question." "Last night," Damien said. "He didn't tell me." "No." Damien looked at him. "He didn't." Pittman absorbed this. His jaw moved slightly. Not quite a reaction, more like the physical signature of an internal adjustment. "He's been sick for 2 years," he said. "He wanted to close this out." "I know. I've worked for that man for 30 years. Pittman's voice was level. Not wounded, level. The voice of a man who dealt in realities and had just received a significant one. "I took the girl because I thought we needed to move faster. I thought you were getting ahead of us." "I was," Damien said. "I know you were." He exhaled through his nose. "For what it's worth, she wasn't in any danger. We had specific instructions about that." "Your instructions became irrelevant the moment you took her," Damien said. "What I want you to understand is that this conversation is happening instead of something else. Something I decided not to do because Crane made a deal in good faith, and because putting you in the ground serves nothing at this point, except a feeling I'm not interested in indulging." Pittman looked at him steadily. "You're going to leave New Orleans," Damien said. "You're going to leave cleanly, without communicating with anyone connected to the Heartline structure or the river corridor. You're going to take whatever Gerald Crane pays you from the settlement, and you're going to apply it to a life somewhere that isn't here." He paused. "If you stay, or if you reestablish contact with anything connected to my operation or my family, the conversation we're not having today becomes the one we have." Pittman said nothing for a moment. He looked at his hands on the table. He looked at Marcus. He looked at Damien. "You're more patient than I expected," Pittman said. "I've had a patient week," Damien said. Pittman almost smiled. It didn't quite get there. He stood up, straightened his jacket, the empty pocket jacket, the jacket of a man who had made a calculation, and walked to the door. He stopped with his hand on the frame. "The girl," he said, without turning around. "She held up well." "I know," Damien said. "She told me the sandwich was bad." Pittman left. Vera was located in Baton Rouge 4 days later, staying at her son's apartment. Damien did not pursue charges. He sent a message through an intermediary. The medical debt she'd been leveraged with had been paid, in full, anonymously, through an attorney she'd never trace. Whatever arrangement she'd made with Bale's network was finished, and there would be no follow-up from Damien's side. The message also said she should not return to the house on the Garden District. Marcus thought this was too generous. Damien said she was a woman protecting her son from a debt that wasn't his fault, and someone used that against her, and the only people who profited from pursuing her further were attorneys. Marcus said nothing after that. Harlan Voss retired 12 days after the meeting on Camp Street. He sent Damien a letter, a physical letter, handwritten on personal stationery, 3 paragraphs long. The third paragraph said, "I have spent 40 years being trusted by people who deserved better. I don't have a justification for what I did. I have a reason, and I understand those aren't the same thing. I hope what I did at the end counts for something in whatever accounting you do of it." Damien read the letter twice. He put it in the desk drawer where the manila envelope had been. He did not respond, but he did not throw it away. The marriage counselor was a woman named Dr. Adayeze Obi, who worked out of an office on Magazine Street, 3 blocks from the po' boy shop, which Lily found satisfying from a logistical standpoint. She was direct in the way that people were direct when they'd spent 20 years listening to couples perform their marriages for each other and had run out of patience for the performance. The first session, she looked at Damien and Elena sitting across from her with the particular physical arrangement of people who were not quite touching and said, "Before we talk about what happened, I want to know what you each thought this marriage was." Elena looked at her hands. I thought it was safe, she said, and I was afraid of how much I'd come to rely on that. Dr. Obi looked at Damien. I thought I was providing something, he said. I didn't understand that providing something isn't the same as sharing it. What's the difference? Dr. Obi said. He thought about it. He thought about Jasmine and surgical bills and handshake deals and a storage unit on Delacroix Street and 11 months of a woman building herself a door while he stood outside it thinking he was building her a house. When you provide something, he said, you're the one who decides what's needed. When you share it, the other person is part of the decision. Dr. Obi wrote something in her notebook. Then she looked at both of them. All right, she said, let's start there. They went every Tuesday for 4 months. Not every session was useful. There were 2 in the second month that ended with Damien and Elena driving home in separate cars because the conversation had surfaced something neither of them was ready to carry calmly. There was a session in the 3rd month where Elena told Dr. Obi, with Damien sitting 3 feet away, that the thing she had most feared was not violence or cruelty, but invisibility. The specific invisibility of being inside a life arranged by someone else, of never being asked what she needed because the person providing assumed they already knew. Damien sat with that. He did not defend himself. He had gotten better, incrementally, at sitting with things instead of managing them. The river contracts were restructured over the following 3 months through a process that involved 4 attorneys, 2 mediators, and a settlement with the Crane estate that was significant but not ruinous. The legitimate shipping operation absorbed the remaining Baton Rouge corridor business through a clean acquisition that Damien's attorneys filed correctly and publicly. The parts of his operation that had operated in the gray margins were dissolved, not quietly, not through careful misdirection, but through a controlled wind-down that he supervised personally and that cost him approximately 30% of his annual revenue. Marcus asked him once, midway through the process, if he was sure. Damien said, I've been sure about very few things in my life. I'm sure about this. Marcus nodded and went back to work, which was the most endorsement he typically gave anything. Elena's mother came to visit in November. She came for a weekend and stayed for 10 days, which was not unusual for her. And on the 3rd day, she and Damien had a conversation in the kitchen that Elena was not present for. It started because Elena's mother came in for coffee at 7 in the morning and found Damien already there, standing at the window in the early dark with both hands around a mug. You look better, Elena's mother said. I feel better, he said. She poured her coffee and stood on the other side of the island and looked at him with the particular quality that Elena's mother had, which was the quality of a woman who had learned very young to assess men accurately and had never unlearned it. She stayed, Elena's mother said. She did. Not because she had to. I know. She picked up her coffee. I want you to know, she said, that I told her to go, that I told her the exit plan was the right instinct. She held his gaze with the directness that Elena had inherited. I was wrong about you specifically. I wasn't wrong about the instinct. The instinct was right, Damien said. She should have had the door. Elena's mother looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, she's going to open the shop in March. Elena had decided in October. She had found the space, a small storefront on Freret Street, good foot traffic, reasonable rent. And she had walked Damien through it on a Tuesday afternoon with the specific energy of a woman presenting something that belonged entirely to her. It was going to be a laundry and alterations business, small, manageable, built from her own money, the $22,000 from the storage unit envelope, which Damien had returned to her without comment, in the original envelope set on the kitchen counter one morning while she was making coffee. She had looked at it and then looked at him. Don't, he'd said. It's yours. It was always yours. She had opened the envelope and counted it, not out of distrust but out of the habit of a woman who had learned to account for everything herself. And then she had put it in her own bank account and 6 weeks later had signed the lease on the Freret Street space. Lily had opinions about the name. She had been consulted extensively and had submitted 3 proposals, all of which were slightly too clever, and Elena had ultimately named it Heart Clean, which was her maiden name, and a statement of intent she didn't feel the need to explain to anyone. Damien had helped her move equipment into the space on a Saturday in January. He had carried things and not made suggestions about the arrangement, and had driven twice to the hardware store for items she needed,
And at the end of the day, he had sat on an overturned laundry crate in the back room while Elena put up the shelving she'd chosen herself. And she had handed him things when she needed them handed, and asked him what he thought only twice, both times about specific practical questions, and he had answered those and kept his other thoughts to himself. At one point, she was on the step stool, reaching to level the second shelf bracket, and she wobbled slightly, and his hand went to the small of her back automatically, steadying her, and she let it stay there for a moment before she found her balance. Neither of them said anything about it. The watch had been his father's. It was a silver pocket watch, plain-faced, with a chain that had been repaired once, badly, by someone who hadn't known what they were doing. His father had carried it every day for the last 15 years of his life, and when his father died, Damien had put it in a box and put the box in a drawer and not taken it out in 23 years because the thing his father had carried every day was not an object of comfort. He took it out in December. He cleaned it. He had the chain properly repaired by a jeweler on Magazine Street who did the work carefully and charged an honest price. He wound it and checked that it still kept time, which it did, which said something about the things that survived beyond their owners. He gave it to Lily on a Sunday morning in February, sitting at the kitchen table while Elena was in the backyard with her coffee, visible through the window. He set it on the table between them. Lily looked at it. She picked it up and turned it over. On the back, in a font that was trying to be elegant and mostly achieving it, was engraved, "For the days worth keeping." "It was my father's," Damien said. Lily looked up. "Your dad?" "Yes." She turned it over again. "What was he like?" Damien thought about this with the honesty the question deserved. "He was a man who made deals he didn't fully explain," he said, "who provided things without always sharing them, who loved people in ways they sometimes couldn't see." He paused. "I think he was trying. I think he didn't always know how." Lily looked at him with the green-gray eyes she'd gotten from her mother and the sideways patience she'd gotten from somewhere he couldn't entirely identify. "Sounds familiar," she said. He almost laughed. He actually laughed this time. A real one, shorter than it deserved to be, but real. "Yeah," he said. "It does." She closed her hand around the watch, not clutching it, just holding it, the way she held things she was deciding about. "Can I wind it?" "Every morning," he said. "Otherwise it stops." She nodded seriously, accepting this as the instruction it was. She set it on the table in front of her and finished her orange juice, and then picked it up again and put it carefully in the front pocket of her sweatshirt. Through the window, Elena turned and saw them at the table. She lifted her coffee in a small acknowledgement, not waving, just lifting it, a gesture that said, "I see you," and turned back to the yard. The jasmine on the fence was not blooming yet. It would bloom in April, the way it always did, the way it had since the housekeeper planted it at Damien's request 3 springs ago. A request he'd made because Elena had mentioned her grandmother's yard once, in passing, years back, and he had stored it in the way he stored everything, quietly, without announcing the storage, in the place where he kept the things that mattered. He was going to have to learn to say those things out loud. He knew this. He was learning this the way he'd learned everything else that had cost him something. Not smoothly, not in one session, not because a decision had been made and therefore the difficulty dissolved. He was learning it the way the levee learns water, by receiving the pressure directly, over time, without the option of pretending it wasn't there. Dr. Obi had said in their last session, the goal isn't to become a different person. The goal is to stop using the person you are as an excuse for not trying. He was trying. That was the whole of it, and it was not a small thing, and it was not finished. Elena came inside with her empty coffee mug and stopped in the kitchen doorway and looked at Damien and Lily at the table in the February morning light, and her face did the thing it did when she was not performing anything for anyone. The thing it had done over the suitcase and over the laundry shelving and over 17 other moments in the past year when she had been caught off guard by something she felt before she could decide how to feel about it. "What are you two doing?" she said. "Nothing," Lily said, with the specific innocence of a child who had just received a pocket watch and understood, instinctively, that this was something between herself and her father. Elena looked at Damien. He looked back at her. 6 years. A storage unit and a rented house and a packed suitcase and a red circle drawn around a face in a warehouse and a 71-year-old man in a cardigan and 4 months of Tuesday evenings in an office on Magazine Street and a laundry shop on Freret Street and a silver watch with a bad chain now repaired, keeping time. Nothing, he said. She looked at them both for another moment. Then she walked to the counter and rinsed her mug, and the kitchen settled into the quiet of a Sunday morning, ordinary and unremarkable and still intact. Outside, the February air moved through the garden district the way it always did. Not cold exactly, not yet warm, carrying the promise of jasmine that was still 2 months off, but coming, reliably, the same as every year before it and every year after, indifferent to the difficulty of the people beneath it and present for them anyway. Lily took the watch out of her pocket and held it in her palm. She didn't wind it yet. She just looked at it, at the plain silver face and the repaired chain and the words on the back that someone had thought to put there for the days worth keeping. She put it back in her pocket. She finished her orange juice. The morning continued.